Hi, I'm Josh McGrath,
I'm Andrew Haas.
and this is the Ardent Pursuit Podcast. Today, we're going to continue examining key areas of our lives that we as men need to have a vision for when it comes to beginning a new year. We've already explored the idea of being spiritually grounded, relationally connected, and physically fit. And today, we're going to examine how what we consume and what we engage with on a daily basis can affect our mental state. So, Andrew, obviously what we're going to look at today is not necessarily mental health. Of course, some of the things we're going to look at can impact our mental health, but really what we're trying to unpack here is how, certain things, we're going to look at 6 key areas today, but how these things can really affect where we're at mentally, which then can have a cascading effect in other parts of our lives.
Yes, we are not doctors and we're not here to diagnose anything
Absolutely
or
not.
give definitions to anything, but we do want to talk about the things that men do or don't do that will greatly impact their mental state.
Now, last week we discussed the importance of being physically fit, and one of the areas we examined was the idea that what you eat, the input, can affect the output, how you look, and how you feel. And in the same way today, we're going to examine how the input of what you consume, mentally can really affect your output, your mental state.
Yes, much like you can be physically fit or unfit, it's possible to be mentally fit or unfit. And we're going to look at some of the ways that men can pursue mental fitness and mental health. And the cool thing is there's even some overlap. So as you pursue, say, physical fitness, that's going to help your mental state.
Sure.
And vice versa. As you pursue mental fitness, that's going to benefit other areas of your life.
And just as with, getting physically fit, there's going to be a lot of discipline needed to be mentally fit. Understanding the, how you're consuming things, when you're consuming things, how much that you're consuming, all of those things play a role in, the mental stability of a man. And while we as men don't tend to think of our mental health, of our mental state that much, it's really important to recognize that, things that we consume have an impact on us mentally, whether we're aware of it or not.
And much like there are symptoms to being physically unfit, it could be weight gain, it could be skin conditions, it could be, a variety of symptoms. It's just good to be aware of there are mental symptoms that could point to needing growth and being mentally fit. It could be things like difficulty holding a conversation or a short attention span or difficulty sleeping. And we're not going to get into specifics of what the symptoms might be, but just recognize that much like being physically unfit, there are often symptoms. And so mentally, as you pursue being mentally healthy, look for undesirable symptoms.
And we'll try really hard to use the terms, mental state or mentally healthy, attempting to avoid the term mental health because that's already defined. It's a clinical thing. Unfortunately, we might slip up and we might use mental health at moments to really be talking about a mental state or mentally healthy. I just want to make sure our listeners are aware we're not using mental health, if we do say it, in a clinical term. We're definitely using it to describe a mental state of healthiness.
And for this episode, we're going to dive into a few different categories, those being social media, news and media, movies and TV shows, music, entertainment and gaming, and reading.
And what we're going to focus on today is how these activities, when engaged with on a daily or weekly basis, impacts our mental state, how they impact us mentally. And so let's dive in with number 1 here, social media. This is a crazy stat. Adults, so 18 and over, spend an average of 2 hours and 19 minutes per day on social media, which accounts for about 14% of their awake hours.
Which is kind of crazy. That's the middle. That means half or more than that and half or less.
And we've discussed some of the negative aspects of social media on the show before. And today's episode is definitely not about, attacking social media and telling men that they should never be on social media. Really what we want to begin to examine here is the role that social media may play in our lives, because whether we like it or not, social media is part of our culture. It's part of our lives on some level. Even if you don't have an account, guess what? You can't read through a news article without them referencing a social media post. You are going to see it somewhere and in some way. And the question becomes, how do we as men in 2025 engage with social media in a healthy way that benefits us rather than brings us down, makes us frustrated, makes us feel hopeless, makes us feel depressed?
And what we want men to be open to is the idea that social media in some way could be negatively impacting them. And for them to be open and ready to look into the ways that it could be negative and how to fix that.
If you're someone who hears this and is becoming defensive of how, social media doesn't impact me, it's not a negative thing, I'm not wasting too much time on social media, that might be an indicator that you actually have an unhealthy relationship with social media.
Yeah, you're probably the person that we're speaking to.
Absolutely. It's not uncommon for men to, particularly single men, to waste hours of their day or particularly night just scrolling endlessly on social media. There's this thing called infinite scrolling. And its very idea is to prevent you from ever getting to the end of your feed. You will endlessly scroll until such a point as you either put away the device or you fall asleep while scrolling. And that is so unhealthy. And it's not uncommon that men will spend nights getting in bed and then scrolling endlessly. And oftentimes, there's this term doom scrolling. It's not just that fact that they're infinitely scrolling, it's that the algorithm is now showing them content that is really negative. It's something that makes them frustrated, angry, hopeless, depressed. And they'll just continue to scroll for hours, consuming this content in a very passive way that is impacting them in some way, shape, or form.
Right. Stop and think about, what's the long-term impact of that? What's the long-term benefit from that? It's likely zero. And what we want men to be open to is this idea that culture has acclimated us to a level of social media use that's actually unhealthy.
Yeah.
But because it's become so normalized, it's so pervasive, all our peers are engaging with it in this capacity. It's just so normal that we take that to be normal without really stopping to think, what are the healthy limits? What are healthy expectations? What is a healthy use of social media?
And we've become addicted to it, or maybe a better word is dependent upon it in such a way where to do normal activities without your phone can cause you to feel either stressed, can cause you to feel anxious, or in my case, can make me feel like I'm totally wasting my time. I'll give you an example. If I go into a store and I forget my phone, I leave it in the car, and there happens to be a line in the store at the checkout, and I'm just standing there, I'm like, this is such a waste of time. Like, if I had my phone, I could be reading the news, I could be scrolling social media, I could be learning something. Instead, I have to just stand here and let the seconds or minutes pass me by. These are seconds or minutes I'll never get back. And suddenly I'm so concerned about the use of my time in that moment. Meanwhile, I'll scroll for an hour and not be concerned at all. But it's amazing how that 5 minutes or 3 minutes or 1 minute that I'm standing in line at the checkout can feel so long. And I'm sitting there so frustrated at myself for leaving my phone in the car. And I'm like, maybe that's a problem. Maybe that's unhealthy.
Yeah, we've acclimated to a certain expectation, which that actually might not be healthy. And studies are starting to show that the brain having periods of, downtime are actually good and necessary.
Yeah.
We don't like it, but that doesn't change the fact that it's good and healthy. And so when we don't allow for those, phones and other screens have just enabled this constant, this constant influx, this constant feeding of information, which we find satisfying. But what's actually healthy for our bodies is to have this ebb and flow, periods of standing in a line for 10, 15 minutes, as annoying as that is, that could actually be really healthy for us.
And let's be honest, at the end of the day, you, the user, are the product.
Yes.
You might be thinking, I'm using Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, YouTube, whatever, and that is the product. But the reality is all of that is free. These multi-million-dollar platforms are completely free to you. Why are they completely free to you? Because the only people paying are the companies. that get access to the product, which is you.
Mm-hmm.
And so by nature of that reality, social media has been designed strategically, psychologically, mentally, and emotionally to maximize the number of hours you will spend on your device on that platform. And so the algorithms are these sophisticated algorithms that are designed to show you content that will keep you engaged, keep you scrolling. And at this point, how often do we actually see content by people we know versus what the algorithm is showing us? I hate Instagram because for every one post that I see from someone I actually know, I see 50 posts that it's recommending. And I have no way of removing those recommendations from my feed. I have no way of getting all the people I actually know and want to see in my home feed. Same thing with Facebook. It's just gonna keep showing me these recommended posts and I have no option but to scroll and see them or just disengage and not use the platform altogether.
And here's something we want men to stop and really think about. Who could you point to in your social circles or celebrity, anyone really, where you could look to them and say they are noticeably better off because of social media? How has social media made them a better person? It's really, really hard to find a case where social media has actually made us, better people.
Yep.
Not to say we need to get rid of it, although I would make a case for that. And you could say, well, it provides income for a lot of people, and yeah, there are a lot of jobs created. But I'm saying if the introduction of social media into our lives as something to consume, as something to engage with, could you stop and think about somebody, either that you know personally or just someone that you've heard of, where it has actually made them a better person? I can't. And that's one of the things that has me stopping to think, okay, what's the real value here? Sure, I can use it in helpful ways.
Yep.
It can be useful for things, but is it actually making me a better person or helping me toward things that make me a better person? It's really hard to say.
One of the things that I find with social media is that, particularly for men, it will oftentimes be a gateway, a doorway by which men will end up engaging with content that they generally are actively trying to avoid. Social media has allowed a generation of women to expose themselves in indecent or inappropriate ways en masse. So it's not like you've got to go searching for inappropriate pictures or videos. Now, that is oftentimes the norm by which many women today are posting, and the algorithm or the recommended will begin showing it to you. And so a lot of times you'll get these innocent men who are just like, hey, I'm just gonna, be on social media, looking at whatever, XYZ, and suddenly there's a recommended post of inappropriate content. And like now they've got to actively work to not click into that, because guess what? If they click into that, now what is the algorithm learning? Oh, he likes to see that. And now it's going to be doubly as hard to avoid that, because now it's going to show you more pictures and more videos of that. And if you watch some more of those, suddenly your feed is dominated by inappropriate pictures and videos of women exploiting themselves online for likes and follows. And you, as the quote unquote innocent guy who was just using social media one day to, follow, your Lord of the Rings account, you're like knee deep, waist deep, neck deep in inappropriate content. And that's all without ever leaving the platform and going to other external sites that might be pornographic. And so one of the challenges that I think social media has presented for men in the modern age is, like, you've got to be even more on guard when you're on social media.
Yeah.
Because the algorithm is out to trip you up, to take advantage of your purity, to really try to drive a wedge between you and what is right, what is holy, to make self-control that much harder. And so if men aren't like actively having this discussion, actively thinking about it, they will just passively, innocently, whatever, engage with social media in a way where they're consuming this content and they're like, well, it's not technically porn, so it's not bad. I'm like, sure, it's not technically, but a steady diet of inappropriate pictures online is eventually going to lead you to more inappropriate behaviors.
Right. It's like that, slow drip from the pipe. It's not going to be a problem immediately, but after a year of water slowly leaking out of a pipe, you're going to have, your whole wall's going to be a mess. And so for men, it's sometimes hard for us to identify when something is not explicitly harmful or wrong.
Yes, particularly on the front end.
On the front end, there's this gray area where it's like, yeah, it's not problematic. I got a handle on it. And that's the area where men really need to be careful in evaluating, is this actually helping me get to the place where I want to go? For example, men should be open to the idea of sharing their screen time, specifically with social media, with another guy. If that's something that you're open to, great. You should seriously walk down that path and see where it goes. And if you're not open to that, ask yourself, why not? Why would that be a problem?
And for men, if you're going to engage with social media, if you're going to use it, which, awesome, do it. I use it. You need to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. So this might require you to unfollow certain people, maybe because of the content they're posting is inappropriate, or maybe the content they're posting is creating a negative reaction inside of you. Back in 2016, 2017, 2018, I was following, 100 some people in the political arena. And most of them were not politicians. They were, influencers in the political space. And I found myself getting frustrated and angry and annoyed and really disliking everyone who held an opposing view to me and feeling like they're all out to get me. And I was like, this is unhealthy. But it was because I was consuming a steady diet of kind of shock jock style, on the ground, social media influencers. And so I think it was 2018, 2019, somewhere in there, I went through and I unfollowed every single one of them. I was like, this is just unhealthy for me. And so men need to have the wherewithal to know if some of the content they're consuming, whether it's because they're following it or because they're stuck, doom scrolling through the algorithm, they need to set up some parameters by which they're going to be successful if they're going to utilize social media.
It is hard to have a steady diet of social media and also excel in soft skills. And you might disagree with me and say, hey, there's no link there, there's no correlation. And I would say to you, I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in the people around me. The bigger the presence of social media, the harder it is to engage in soft skills.
Sure.
And, just to name a few, communication, time management, adaptability, work ethic, self-motivation, patience, and the list is long. There's, dozens. But it's really hard for men over the long haul to excel in these soft skills if they have a pretty consistent long-term diet of social media.
It's true. One last thought regarding social media, because we could talk about this the entire day. Before we move on, though, I want to highlight that one of the things that social media has created are what culture calls, keyboard warriors. People who sit at home, behind the screen and are happy to, fling arrows all day long at other people, whether it's people they know or complete strangers online. And you end up in these very toxic, unhealthy, name-calling, degrading debates. I'll put that in big quotes because it's not a debate. There's no good faith going into it. There's very little academia or intellect being involved. It's mostly mudslinging, name-calling. And that is just unhealthy. And as a man, particularly if you want to be a man who's going to one day be a husband and a father, a respected leader in your community, you do not want to be spending hours of your day just commenting all these negative name-calling comments to other people online. That is not representative of an honorable, godly man. And so social media has created an environment that allows this to happen prolifically. And so by disengaging with social media or setting up, safeguards, you can prevent yourself from participating in what I'll really call a very toxic online debate culture.
The next area we want to look at is news and media. And the really important thing to understand here is that basically all news, not all, but basically all news and media has a bias. They've lost objectivity.
Yep.
And so just be careful where you get your news from, and purpose to recognize the bias, purpose to recognize what the narrative might be. It's okay to read something that has a narrative. It's okay to read something that has a bias.
Sure.
But go into it recognizing where the bias might be and what the hidden narrative might be.
Yeah, the legacy media at this point, by and large, exists to stir up consternation inside of its readers. It's meant to create a heightened emotional state to essentially trigger outrage in those who are reading or watching their news. And so whether that's on the right or the left, if it's a legacy news outlet, 9 times out of 10, that is what they are doing, which is why we're partially in the mess that we're in today, why people can't have good faith conversations with each other, and why they all cherry pick the news source that they trust or don't trust. And while it's very important for men to be informed, to know what's going on in society, in America, in your community, so absolutely read the news. Knowing where you're getting the news, like you said, understanding the bias of the news source that you're reading is important. And for men, they just need to be aware that they may need to limit their consumption of news and media because so much of it is sensationalized today. It is meant to stir up an emotional, heightened state. And that oftentimes isn't good or healthy for men.
Yes, that is something that we all need to keep at the forefront of our mind, that these publications do not exist to inform us so much as to further a certain mindset, a certain narrative, a certain bias.
Yep.
And for men who feel compelled to stay current on the news, they want to engage, keep up on the news, I would say that's great. It's going to be best, it's going to be healthy if, say, a guy can read a left-leaning source, recognize where the bias is, read something that is right-leaning, recognize where the bias is. Problems arise when you get all of your news, all of your headlines come from either traditionally left-leaning, traditionally right-leaning, and that's where the problems arise. You don't want to get stuck one way or the other, because then it gets really hard to recognize where the bias is.
And to assume that your preferred news source isn't biased actually demonstrates your own bias.
Exactly.
And so I have long read, the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, and I have many friends, particularly on the left, who will argue that that's like the trusted paper because it's like center. It's not biased left or right. And I'm like, okay, you're just admitting your own bias with these papers, because while they can provide some useful resources, by and large, they are extremely biased. And that's okay, they're allowed to be. The problem arises when the paper itself, when the news outlet itself, when its readers and consumers are under the false belief that it is not biased. That's when problems arise.
And this is where I would recommend things like long-form content. Podcasts could be longer news articles.
I say you're a big fan of longer form podcasts. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
It is, in my opinion, a very good place to get a full picture on a particular point of view, a particular topic. It's really hard to get a holistic view on something from a few paragraphs in a news article or in a 10 to 20 minute podcast episode.
Basically what we do here.
Yes.
It's really hard for any of our listeners to get something useful out of what we're presenting.
And we've said this before. We'll open doors. We won't necessarily walk through them. And so we're hopefully giving guys something to think about, something to put onto their front burner, something new to consider. Be like, oh, I need to give this more thought. And actually take that and then go find a 3-hour podcast on something we said. But yes, I would actually recommend don't stop here. We'll give some good info, but it's very preliminary. To get a healthier view on anything that we say here, it would actually be healthy to go find a 2-hour podcast, a 3-hour podcast. Go find a TED Talk.
Yep.
Something that's much longer, more in depth.
For sure. Let's move into the third area of focus, which is movies and TV shows. And this one can easily, trigger people because we're awfully protective of our favorite TV shows, of our favorite actors, of our favorite movies. And we want to help men look more objectively at the type of movies and TV shows they're consuming and to see what influence it may be having on them. Because much like social media, particularly TV shows, are now written and filmed in a way to make us addicted, right? The cliffhanger, wanting to come back. Now, that's not a bad thing. I think that's compelling story writing. I think that is very creative filming. That is good acting. I love that. One of the most frustrating things to me is when I begin a new series and I get to the end and it's on this massive cliffhanger. And because it's a new series, I know I'm gonna have to wait a year or two before season 2 comes out. I'm like, this is the dumbest thing. This is why I tend to watch shows that came out 10 or 15 years ago, because all the seasons are available and I don't have to wait. It's so frustrating to have to wait in real time. Again, going back to an impatient generation, because I'm addicted to social media, scrolling all the time, right? But for men, there are TV shows and movies out there that may be very unhealthy for them to consume. And I'm gonna pick on one that I know we're gonna get some flack on, but I think it's an important one that we've talked about before. Game of Thrones.
Not The Office.
Not The Office.
Okay.
You're good. You can keep watching that one. So Game of Thrones. We've talked about it before here on the show. I love fantasy. Love fantasy movies, love fantasy books, love fantasy TV shows. I have watched a couple episodes from season 1 of Game of Thrones. It was really well done. And I've heard nothing but that it's an amazing TV show and it's so well done. However, one of the central elements to the story, to the plot, to the show is graphic nudity. And they actually strategically built in plot development into graphic nudity scenes. So if you were to skip those scenes, you would actually be confused about what was happening because the plot moved progressively, but you didn't see it or hear it. And again, I'm not here to judge anyone who's watched that, but I will question your motives for watching it. Because when you have a TV show where one of the central aspects of it is graphic nudity throughout all, I think there's 10 seasons of it or so, I begin to question whether people are watching it because the story and the plot is so compelling or because the graphic scenes are so compelling. And so again, if you're a man, particularly if you're a man of faith and you're consuming 10 seasons of graphic nudity, I'm like, I love fantasy as much as the next guy, but I'm uncertain the benefit to you spiritually, emotionally, or mentally of watching 10 seasons of Game of Thrones.
It is really hard to recognize when we've acclimated to something that is unhealthy. And this is just a small example, but I was talking to a friend who was here. He's an international student, and he was here. We were chatting. I said, "What's it like here, being in this country?" And he said, "You guys eat so much cheese." He said it actually took him a few months to acclimate to going to friends' houses or just through normal fast food. Who knows? But that was one of his first observations, and for him, it was a problem. He doesn't prefer cheese, and so being here, I didn't see any problem. I eat a lot of cheese. It's normal to me. The culture that he comes from, the food that he traditionally eats, that's not part of it. And so when he comes here, all of a sudden he sees something that is not normal to him. It's normal to me. And so I think we can there's a good place to stop and think, okay, is there something that I live in? Is there a world that I live in where something is normal, where maybe it shouldn't be normal. Like, am I eating too much cheese, so to
Sure.
speak? Would someone else who's in a completely different culture, if they were to watch and see what I watch, would they think, that's something's out of balance there?
It's true because particularly men, I think probably are more comfortable watching inappropriate content than on average women. And I think back to, my early college days and I watched, all the National Lampoon movies. Those were hilarious. It's like raunchy, frat bro humor. And it cracked me up and they were the best movies I thought at the time. Now, looking back, I'm like, those are terrible movies and I should have never watched them. But if your diet is kind of that crass, raunchy humor that, is maybe inappropriate, but maybe is not graphic nudity, that's going to impact you. If your go-to content is a TV show or movie where every other word is a swear word, is the F word, that's going to affect you. If you're watching movies or TV shows that focus on horror or like murder, like dark murder, like psychological stuff, that's going to affect you in some way, shape, or form. Maybe you're like, I feel great. The only effect is I feel better. Okay, you're probably the outlier. But in some way, shape, or form, that's going to affect you. And so you want to be aware of what am I consuming and what is its effect on me emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and maybe even in some cases, physically.
Anything you watch over a sustained period of time will become more normal, and you will be less in tune with any problems that may be arising due to that being present.
And if you're going to watch a TV show, if you're going to watch a movie, which I'm a huge fan of, I love movies, I love TV shows, leverage that opportunity to do it with other people. While watching movies, TV shows alone isn't bad, it can become a bad habit in your life where you don't engage with others. It's like, I just need, a night home alone, just sit in front of the TV and just, watch my favorite show. And next thing you know, you're like a miser, introvert, staying at home, watching TV shows or movies all by yourself. That's unhealthy. That's unhelpful. That's not good for you, particularly as a man, particularly as a single man. So leverage the opportunity to watch a show or movies to get together with other people, make it more of a community event.
And we actually live by that principle in our own home. For us, we've decided that watching movies alone is just something that we don't think is beneficial. So my wife and I have just decided that if we're going to watch a movie, it'll be with the kids, it'll be with friends, each other. But for us, we've decided, there's no benefit to us watching movies alone. It might not be wrong,
Sure.
but we've just decided for our home, for who we are, we don't see the benefit there. And in fact, there's probably benefit to not doing that. And so those are things for men to consider as they look at what am I watching and how much am I watching. So men need to be aware of the types of movies and TV shows they watch and the impact it could be having on them. Now, the next area we want to look at is music. We should pay attention to the type and style of music that we listen to and just recognize that music, whether we know it or not, has a huge influence on us.
Now, we're not going to categorize the type of music you should listen to or the type of music you should not listen to. What we want to do today is highlight that certain styles and certain lyrics may be impacting you in a negative way. Whether that's, you're listening to maybe a lot of rap music or a lot of screamo music or a lot of, hardcore rock music, something with a driving beat all the time. I love music that pumps me up. Love it when I'm running, love it when I'm at the gym. But if that's like my go-to music constantly, when I'm in the car, when I'm getting ready in the morning, when I'm getting ready for bed in the evening, like that's gonna have an impact on me. It's important for our soul to have a rest from a driving beat. And so if your go-to music is like all bass driven and beat driven, maybe consider examining other genres of music that you can listen to that will give you rest mentally, emotionally, and maybe even spiritually by prioritizing non-lyric based music, something like soundtracks, classical music, jazz music. There's a ton of random instrumental music out there. Like, go ahead and listen to something else for a portion of the day so that you give yourself reprieve from something that's really driving all the time.
And something that we should be open to, kind of to this end, is am I listening to too much of something? And music is one of those areas where, it's not right or wrong, and that's not what we're here for. But we want men to think about, am I doing something in a healthy capacity?
Sure.
Am I doing something with a healthy quantity? And think about, again, the type of music, the style, the amount. Are all of these eventually bringing me to a better place?
And lyrics play an important role in this. There's a lot of music out there that maybe isn't, quote unquote, inappropriate. But the lyrics are really, at the end of the day, not good, not helpful, not uplifting, not building others up. And of course, there's plenty of music out there where the lyrics absolutely, like, objectively are terrible and awful. And they are, like, destructive and bad. Like, don't listen to that. Part of what we as men need to do is be aware that even passively consuming music, and maybe you're not really a lyric kind of guy. Maybe you're not like, I listen to all the lyrics and I know every word. I'm not that way. I don't, most of the time, don't even know the lyrics to worship songs because I'm so focused on the musical aspect. But even passively listening, those lyrics are little seeds that are being planted in your mind. And if taken root, have a negative impact on you in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, music has a powerful and subtle effect on us, and we just want to recognize what that effect is and have the mental capacity to recognize if there is an unhealthy aspect to the music that we listen to.
Now, if you are a Christian, if your faith is in Jesus, it is important that you prioritize music that glorifies and honors God. Now, while this has been a debate for decades, maybe longer, maybe centuries.
Churches can't even agree what songs to sing.
Exactly. A simple recommendation is this. Pick music that is clearly, explicitly got God and Jesus in the chorus or the verses.
That's a safe place to land.
Safe place to land. Maybe it's a worship album. Maybe it's by a Christian artist. I don't know. If you want to debate and say, well, classical music is Christian music or jazz music is Christian music, I'm like, look, that's an interesting debate, but a recommendation, a simple recommendation is prioritize music throughout your day or throughout your week where God and Jesus are explicitly mentioned in an honoring way, because there's plenty of music where God and Jesus are mentioned in non-honoring ways in music.
That is true.
Where it's explicitly mentioned in honoring ways in the chorus and in the verses. And by doing that, that's going to be good for your soul. It's going to help uplift your soul. It's going to help remind you to turn your eyes to heaven and to think of the eternal, not just the temporal.
The next area we want to look at is video games. And for guys, this is a big deal. For example, the average age of a male gamer is 34. Men aged 18 to 39 spend an average of 8 to 9 hours per week playing video games.
Wow, that's a lot of time to spend playing video games.
And these aren't high schoolers. I mean, there are high schoolers,
Sure.
But the average age is basically us.
And that's just crazy. The fact that there are adult men, we're not talking, college age men, we're talking like adult, professional career, can be fathers and husbands, aged men who are spending 8 to 9 hours a week playing video games.
And the problem isn't, the problem is the time spent. The problem is even worse considering the effects that video gaming has on men, specifically the false sense of accomplishment. That's one of the game designs of most video games are accomplishments.
Yep.
And men generally have this innate desire to accomplish. And video games help scratch that itch, and it can reduce a man's drive and desire to go accomplish and pursue and perform in real world settings.
I think that's extremely important to highlight and for men to take stock of in their own lives. Because while neither of us are gamers by any stretch of the imagination, I know Pac-Man and that's about it. Solitaire, is that gaming? We're not in that world at all. But it is easy for me to understand how within an artificial universe, you can feel like you're accomplishing things, and to be driven to, go back to that artificial universe and to accomplish more. Like you said, we're driven as men to want to accomplish, to want to take dominion, the mandate in Genesis chapter 2. And so if men aren't cognizant of the fact that these video games are, like you said, really providing a false sense of accomplishment, they will sink years of their lives, thousands of dollars, into an artificial environment that actually doesn't benefit them in any way.
And to be clear, I have thoroughly enjoyed video games in the past, and it's very likely that I would today under the right circumstances. The point isn't to stay away from video games, although for a specific guy, that might be the right thing. And so we want men to be able to look at themselves and really evaluate, are video games healthy and good for me? Not in general. This isn't like, are they categorically problematic? Are they categorically beneficial? We're not talking about broadly speaking, but each guy for himself should be able to evaluate accurately, is this good and healthy for me?
And there may be certain benefits. I know that, like, hey, if this is your Sabbath day and you want to take some time just to, relax and have fun, so you're going to spend a few hours on your computer or gaming console and you're going to play one of your favorite games, sure. Like, I totally understand that. Go out, rock that out. The problem isn't the fact that you're doing it. The problem is when it begins to consume your life, when all of your free time is spent trying to attain the next level, when suddenly you're budgeting for the next game console because you have to have it because you're not content with the one you already have. That's when it becomes a problem. And so again, maybe there are certain, games out there that are inappropriate. I've read news articles on certain types of games that seem to have inappropriate characters or inappropriate storylines. I'm not here to, be the arbiter of what game is good, what game is bad. The takeaway today is how much time, how much money, how much of an investment are you making into an artificial world?
And much like watching videos alone, watching movies alone, could be problematic for you, for any individual. That could be a problem and something to avoid. Similar way, video gaming alone could be something that you need to change. And we want men to be able to accurately evaluate their own situation and be able to make those tough decisions.
And I know that many men will game together in a community of friends, but it's oftentimes done remotely. So you're all kind of in your individual homes, your headsets, your cool chair, your cool screens, whatever, playing. And I'm like, at least there is a community aspect to that. And I think that can be good and it can be useful. But I would encourage men, as much as you're able to, try to prioritize in-person gaming opportunities. I know it may not be the best setup because it's like you've got the perfect ideal setup at home in your gaming room. And so like if you were to show up at someone else's house, it would be nothing like that. I can appreciate that. But if there are opportunities to try to get together in person, do that. I know that I like to play Age of Empires, a classic game from the late 90s. And when I play it, it's almost exclusively with a group of friends where we come together, we bring our laptops, our headphones, and we'll play together in the same room for, several hours. And that's a lot of fun because you're all right there. You're all experiencing it in real time together, particularly if you're playing PvP. And it can get really intense. You got one team on one side of the table, one team on the other side of the table. That's a lot of fun. So I can appreciate it. But if you're exclusively playing video games, separate from any type of community environment, you should reevaluate whether that's healthy or not for you.
Yes. Stop and reevaluate and really be honest with yourself. Is this helpful? The final area we want to look at is reading.
Now, guys are probably being like, what? Reading?
What is that?
Well, how do we even evaluate that? Like, how do we spell that?
Reading comments?
Reading online? Yes, this is an important one because while men traditionally aren't readers anymore, sadly, if they do read, it tends to be things like magazines, comic books, graphic novels, which again, nothing wrong necessarily with that. But men, first and foremost, should recognize the importance of reading beyond just the graphic novel, the comics, and the magazine. Reading is good for men. Reading is good for humanity, but reading is good for men. Secondly, if you are going to prioritize reading in your life, prioritize content that makes you a better man, that makes you a better thinker, that educates you, that helps you grow as a leader, that helps you grow as, if you're a husband, if you're a business owner, as a business owner, if you're a believer, as a believer, if you're trying to endeavor to do something new, read about that. Become more interesting because of the reading that you're doing. If you're reading simply graphic novels, you're going to be less interesting to the general populace and to the majority of women. Whereas if you begin reading about history, theology, poetry, finances, politics, you'll be much more interesting in any environment that you find yourself in.
And one of the benefits to reading is this ability to draw us out of the immediate gratification, the quick thing that gets our attention that's interesting. And it can actually be quite challenging for a lot of us to read something for more than, say, 10 minutes.
Oh, yes.
If there's a news article that's like, I have to scroll several times through the screen, I'm like, what is this? This is way too much info. And it's like,
put that in an AI and have it summarize it for me.
Right? What's the summary here? And it's like, well, hold on. Why can't I spend 20 minutes or longer reading through in detail something that I'm interested in? And the same goes for books. If it's hard to read a book, that's probably a very strong indication that you should be reading books.
One of the things that I've instituted this year, I don't know if I mentioned it on the show yet or not, is when I go to bed at night, my goal is to read a little bit from a book each night. Whether that's a paragraph, a page, a chapter, however much time I have, however long I'm awake for, I want to be reading as my last thing before I go to bed. And why? Because my goal is to read through several books this year. And I find that if I'm taking at least incremental steps forward, making incremental progress forward, I will eventually get that book done faster than if I think, well, I'll just set aside, 2 hours one day to start reading it. That's never going to happen. I'm never going to set aside 2 hours one day to read it. And so while it is oftentimes hard for men to focus to read, it's actually really good to begin to force yourself into an environment where you put your phone away, it's not next to you, put it across the room or in another room, lock it up in a safe somewhere, throw it out, I don't care, and open up a book and commit to reading for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 25 minutes, half hour, whatever. Just begin reading, begin exercising that part of your brain, and you will find that incremental steps will lead to sustained progress. Whereas if you think, well, I'm just going to finish this book this weekend, 9 times out of 10 for most men, they're not going to do that.
And much like, a podcast that's 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, these longer form content, that can be really beneficial. And in the same way, longer articles, books, it's actually good practice beyond the simple fact that there is better articulated content and points of view
For sure.
in longer content. Just the practice of reading something for a sustained period is really good for us.
Now, in the absence of maybe reading, another good alternative are Audible books. And I know you and I have both taken advantage of these over the years. And one of the things I love about, Audible is the fact that I can, whether it's getting ready in the morning, getting ready in the evening, whether it's, a commute to work or on the road for an extended period of time, I can consume these long form books without having to, sit there and read it. And I know, I don't know if you do this, but I know we have friends who will listen to it, 1.5x or 2x. And so it's like twice as fast. I don't do that. I enjoy books too much to go that fast because I no longer am engaging. I'm just trying to keep up. I feel like I'm drowning the whole time while I'm listening to it. Not as fun. But I love that because it's an easy way to consume a lot of material without having to set aside an hour or two every day. I'm already getting ready in the morning. I'm already getting ready in the evening. I'm already driving somewhere during the day. What if I leverage those opportunities to listen to an Audible book? Boy, I'm going to begin going through a library full of books so much faster than if I just have them sitting on my shelf and my willpower is the thing that's supposed to get me to read them.
Audiobooks are great. I'm a big fan of them, and I don't think they are an inferior substitute to an actual book, so long as it does not completely replace actual reading. Both are important.
And part of the caution here is that if you are going to begin to read more or listen more to books, try to pick material that is going to stimulate your brain, that is going to make you a better person. That's the takeaway, because there are plenty of brainless books out there. And sometimes a brainless book is fun. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, and I love listening to the Harry Potter books on Audible. But at the end of the day, that's kind of brainless, mindless listening. And if that's the only book I'm consuming, that's a major problem, because that's not challenging me. That's not stimulating my brain in the same way that, you know, a good to great book or Rich Dad, Poor Dad book will. And it's really important that for men, particularly if you're single, you've got way more time in the world than other men do right now. So like leverage your freedom of singleness to grow in your ability to learn.
And our recommendation for men is to find content that challenges you or purposes to make you a better man or educates you in a way where you can benefit others.
That's a great place to end today's conversation. So, as always, we want you to evaluate your life. Take the 6 areas that we discussed today and examine whether there are any negative impacts on your life. It's really important to note that, you know, as men, if we're engaging with something on a daily or weekly basis, it's going to impact us in some way, shape, or form, and not always for the better. We want to make sure that you're equipped to go into this year mentally healthy. And one of the best ways to do that is to evaluate your lifestyle choices. As always, we love having you here on the Ardent Pursuit podcast, and we look forward to having you here next time.